Wow, that was an amazing first panel, and standing on the shoulders of giants. We'll hopefully do our best to follow up. And first of all, they weren't kidding when they said the lights are very bright.
Yes.
So apologies if we're squinting a little bit here. So we kind of heard the call to action today for how important it is to have these moonshot ideas, how we have a tremendous shortfall in innovation to meet the challenges of food security, nutritional security, and sustainability. But as I think about our journey and going to the farm, farmers can't plant science. Farmers can't just take innovation and put it into the ground. We really need an ecosystem of solutions to ensure that we actually meet these goals. So our panel today is really trying to bring in a representation of our ecosystem of different players, whether it's the multinationals, whether it's research organizations, funding agencies, as well as basic research, to see what does it really take that if we had the ability and the success to will science into existence, what does it really take for that science to become impact? So I'm going to start off by asking each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and starting with Sarah.
Thanks so much, Han. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name's Sarah Dean. I'm the Global Public Policy Manager with John Deere, and have had the opportunity to spend the last 16 years or so supporting Deere's international businesses, particularly on global policy issues such as food security. I think Deere probably needs no introduction in this room, but we are the global leader in agricultural equipment, and this is our 188th year. So we've certainly seen huge advancements in the technology that we're able to bring to our farmers and customers around the world. And I'd also just like to say a real thanks to the World Food Prize Foundation. You know, we're really honored to be a committed partner to the foundation and all the great work that they do. So thanks.
Simon?
Thank you very much, Han. I'm Simon Heck. I'm the Director General of the International Potato Center. We are one of 15 international research centers that make up the largest publicly funded research network globally, called the CGIAR. Many of you have been working with us as partners, even as staff, and we are active in more than 100 countries. Our role is both as a science implementer, but also as a science partner in building bridges between different regions, between different parts of agriculture, science, and between science and application. Right? We are more on the translational research side to link science to farmers, as you just said. Many of you know us for developing improved varieties of crops. That continues to be a core part of our work, but we move beyond it. We are linking with other areas of science, and I think very appropriately for this event, linking beyond agriculture into exciting new areas of science and bring that to the challenges of agriculture and food security. And thank you to the World Food Prize Foundation for many years of support. Many of our scientists have become laureates as well. So I think it's a long-standing partnership, but looking into the future is what we will talk about today. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Good.
Brooke?
I'm Brooke Jamison. I'm the Chief of the Americas Liaison Office of the International Fund for Agricultural Development, or IFAD, as we call ourselves. So we are both a UN specialized agency and an international financial institution. So our main bread and butter is we provide loans to agricultural products and or companies and rural people all over the world. We like to say we work in the last mile in some of the most fragile places on earth. So we do loans, we do grants, we do technical assistance, and we try to make people in these rural areas who focus a lot on food systems and agriculture, we try to make their dreams come true. We build their businesses, we bring in financing, not just from our organization, but from local governments, from other financing institutions. We work with local banks, and so we're very much driven by the people at the last mile trying to build their food systems all over the world.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
And Philip?
Hi, I'm Phil Pardey. I'm at the University of Minnesota. I spent the first half of my career working for the CGIAR, 10 years here at IFPRI in Washington, D.C. And at the University of Minnesota, although I'm an agricultural economist by training, I actually co-direct a joint venture between the College of Food, Agriculture and Natural Resource Sciences and the Minnesota Supercomputing Institute, It's called the GEMS Informatics Centre. And what we're driven to do is to work to bring data-driven innovation across the whole of the agri-food value chain, not just at the farm level, but thinking about the post-farm impacts of innovation. So,
wonderful. Well, I'm going to start off. In my previous life, I was a venture investor, now entrepreneur, and I can tell you that it's almost impossible to pick winners and losers from research. If I had that crystal ball, I'd be a lot more successful and wealthy, probably. So maybe to start this off, and let's maybe set the stage. Phil, I want to start with you. We can't pick winners and losers about what areas of research we want to work on, but how do we make more impact? So can we make research more impactful as you're thinking about the direction of where we're headed in? And maybe also set the stage of what happens if we don't do this? Like, what are the dire consequences that you see in the numbers and the statistics?
Sure. One of my professional passions is tracking investments in agri-food innovation globally, and we're close to finishing up a new set of data, and I'll give you a little preview about what those trends look like, because they're frankly keeping me up awake at night in terms of when I look at that situation. So the good news is that over the last 40 years or so, investments by the public and private sector in agri-food innovation have expanded dramatically. So they've gone up roughly 2.5-fold from around 40 billion globally to around 105, 106 billion globally. But the geography of agri-food innovation has changed big time. So where in the world that research takes place now is not where it took place when I entered the profession decades ago. So around half of the entire world's agri-food R&D spend now takes place in the Asia-Pacific region. So it's no longer centred in North America and Europe. It's actually moved over to the Asia-Pacific region. So if you think of big players like India and China, Japan, Korea, Australia, but we also have emerging middle-income countries like Indonesia and Vietnam and Cambodia, and so huge shift in the geography of agricultural innovation. The drivers of that have been the middle-income countries. So the middle-income countries have driven that huge growth in investments over the years. Brazil, India and China, those three countries alone now collectively outspend the US by an order of magnitude, and they now collectively outspend all of the other high-income countries combined. China, just of itself, has been doubling down on investments in agri-food R&D. So for every dollar, public and private dollar, the US puts into agri-food R&D, Chinese put $2. So their system is twice as big in terms of investments as the US now. And so I think that's changed fundamentally the geography. What's also changed is who's doing that research. And so back in the day, in 1980 or so, our estimates are that around a quarter to a third of the research was done by the private sector. Globally, that's now half. And so I think when we think about innovation looking forward, we have to rethink not just the geography, but the relationships between the public and private sector on who's doing that research and how can we engage those public and private sectors in much more effective and impactful ways. And I think underlying those broad trends is the thing that gives me pause for concern, and that is in the US, for example, and other high-income countries, of late we've seen a slowing down and in fact a falling back of investments in public investments in the agri-food sector. So just here in the US alone, today we're investing in inflation-adjusted terms what we invested back in the mid-1970s. So if, like myself, there's others in here that work for US universities, and we know back in the day there were capabilities to support graduate students and encourage new faculty coming in. Those days are long gone as a practitioner, and you see them in the data. And so we've been actually whittling down our capacity here for the last several decades in our capacity in ag R&D. And so we need to turn that around rapidly, because in other forums I've dubbed investments in ag R&D as slow magic. And it's slow because it just takes time for spending that research dollar to have an impact on farmers' fields or in other parts of the agri-food value chain. It still takes us 6 to 10 years to develop a new crop variety, depending on the crop you're talking about. There's regulatory hurdles to jump over. There's bulking foundational seed up so that we get enough seed to put into farmers' fields. And then it can take years, if not decades, for those new varieties to move out over the landscape. So it's a slow process, but it's also magic in the sense that it has all of these impacts. So it actually impacts on farms in terms of lowering costs of production, increasing productivity, improving the profitability of farmers. It impacts us all in terms of consumers, in terms of more nutritious food, but lowering the price of food. And we also get smarter about how to use the scarce natural resources like water and land that I think previous folks have talked about in agriculture. And so that's the magic part of it. And as a hard-nosed economist, I and lots of other colleagues have tried to put dollars and cents onto this. And if you review the hundreds of studies that have been done on the impacts of ag R&D and the thousands of rates of returns to research estimates, on average, for every dollar that goes into that agri-food R&D knowledge production system, we get $10 back. That's the economic valuation of those lower costs of production and lower prices of food and so forth. So it really pays, but it takes time for that payment to happen. And so persistence really pays in this game. And so my concern is that as we have been slowing down and if not cutting back on these investments, we need to very urgently double down on those investments, because I think the previous panel mentioned 2050 is barely 25 years from now. And that's just a very short time frame to actually turn the ship around and rewrite the sort of trajectory of investments in this space. So my highest priority is to rethink and double down on the public sector investments, because they're key to promoting the private sector innovation that takes place.
And that's a great segue. Maybe, Sarah, I'll go to you, which is the statistics are obviously showing that larger companies and the private sector has to step in. As Deere, when you think about the innovation ecosystem, so much research is being done internally within the company, so much you're reaching out to the startup community or the research community. How do you see the role of multinationals and kind of being that facilitator ultimately of that technology to the grower as one of the most well-known brands?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, I think maybe just to start, from a John Deere perspective, the technologies that we're developing are not being developed just for technology's sake, but rather to solve a problem that our farmer customers have. And so they're designed to really address what is the need of the farmer. And we do that by working closely with our farmer customers around the world to address all of the challenges that they have. We all know the difficulties, whether it's dealing with different weather patterns or soil health challenges, labor availability, that no matter where you are in the world, farmers are dealing with these challenges. And so when we think about whether it's the increasing adoption of precision technologies and how we can be more efficient with the inputs that are being used and more precise about where those are being put, so like our weed sensing see and spray technology, or addressing labor concerns through the advancements in autonomy solutions that we've launched in recent years, those are really trying to address the problem on the ground. And I think we tie that to the partnership approach of how do we as a large company work with both academic institutions that we partner with to test some of these types of technologies, and working with researchers to, we have a John Deere Startup Collaborator that specifically works with specific startups to help bring them into the ecosystem of a larger company so that they have more ability to scale some of those technologies and work with our core dealers and markets to really test them out and see that they work. But then also, looking at partnerships with others across the value chain. So whether it's other private companies or, multilateral institutions or others, to ensure that we're all kind of trying to get to the same approach of how do we bring the right technologies, scale them in the right way so that we're enabling farmers to be more productive, more efficient, and more sustainable throughout the world.
Wonderful. Simone, this is maybe a question for you then, because CGIAR, obviously one of the most prominent research organizations, but it's a collaboration between multiple entities, and the idea is that, many hands make light work, and you're cross-sharing a lot of this knowledge. As you think about the organization overall and the importance of collaboration and coordination for the biggest impact, what have been some of the lessons that you've learned to make that research more impactful and that translation?
Yeah, very good indeed, right? Partnership is at the core of our approach. It's partnership between different types of agricultural institutions in research, academic research, universities, in the private sector as well, where a lot of innovation is happening. Many of these investments are rather isolated from each other, and so they don't, in the right kind of timely and urgency-driven way, add up to momentum, right? So one of our lessons is that early on in that process of investment planning, it's important to set priorities, right? And priorities based on evidence. And that there should be a basic agreement on that evidence. That's easier said than done anywhere in the world, more so looking and working across countries and regions. But this is an important step forward, and I think economists and others can help with that. And then throughout the planning phase, the design phase, to make sure there's buy-in from all relevant parties. And buy-in also includes literal buy-in, co-financing from the private sector in an appropriate way, looking at segmenting the product chain and say, what are segments that can be commercialized early on without jeopardizing the public goods nature of the overall enterprise. Right? We are learning lessons around that in the breeding chain, for example. It's also then, of course, about segmenting target markets. Right? There are economic and commercial incentives in some market segments early on for a new crop variety, for example, or for a new vaccine. There are other market segments when that's not yet apparent, where public sector concerns come in that need to be supported from public sector funding. But if we plan across these different segments, we get higher returns on investment, also higher returns for taxpayers. And we have a more inclusive kind of impact. Right? The CGI, if we look back the last 50 plus years, we are proud of our achievements in covering, I think it's more than 500 million acres of farmland with improved crops that generate about $47 billion every year from that initial investment. Now, looking into the future to say, well, maybe those partnerships, again, need to be updated. Right? There are other drivers behind that, as we know. To take one example, and you forgive me, it will be the potato. Right, that is moving into the Asia-Pacific region. Right? Today, you might be surprised to hear that almost 60% of all potato in the world is grown in Asia-Pacific and consumed in Asia-Pacific. And so it's become more or less an Asian crop. I just come from India 2 days ago, where I met both with government as well as with farmers. There's huge demand for international cooperation, for potato science, potato research, that covers all the things that we used to do for other crops, right? It covers access to germplasm. They want to have accessions from gene banks that SIB is holding in Peru on behalf of the international community. It's driven by private sector interest. Almost all major potato companies in the world, including from this country, are now targeting the market in India. It's the largest potato market in the world. Right? And they want to do that on their terms. But government says, hold on a minute, there are some public concerns involved as well. We need more of neutral partners. We need the CGIAR in our case, and your experience with partnership, in addition to your specific crop type of expertise and technologies. So this partnership approach for the future will be ever more important. And we learned how to do it more efficiently, more effectively, so that public investments get a higher return on their investment if we partner well with the private and other types of investors. Right? So that's, I think, a good illustration of the opportunity that's there. But at the heart of it, we need partnership and we need international cooperation. That is unchanged.
And Brooke, coming to you, we've heard a lot about the partnerships, the research collaboration, the product development, but I love your analogy of that last mile because often, there's a New Zealand saying, many a slip between the cup and the lip. So you're providing that last bit to ensure that innovation actually gets into the hands of growers, ensure that, that all this hard work isn't for naught, that we're not falling through at that last step when all the innovation is done. Can you talk a little bit about how that investment has tremendous impact in terms of that realization?
Yeah. So what EFAD does is we are at the last mile, and we are the ones very much on the ground, listening to the farmers, listening to the communities about what they want and what they need. Because as we know, nothing is successful if you don't have buy-in from the stakeholders on the ground level. And so that's what we try to do. We try to create this partnership. We bring in the research, we bring in private investment, and try to make it work for them, because at the end of the day, farmers, of course, are business people. Mm-hmm. And they will try to become more efficient, more productive, whatever research they can. But it's a risk sometimes for them to change and do it differently. And so that's where it's also important to think about the financing part of it, because everybody can come together and everybody can give the good research, but if someone's not there to take the risk with you, mm-hmm. and to ensure that there is this investment, that there is this local, community buy-in from the ministries of agriculture to support this long after the initial investment is gone, nothing will work. And so this is one of those things that I think it is this collaboration that is so important, that will be able to grow these businesses at the last mile to create jobs, to prevent, creating jobs prevents all kinds of problems, conflict, migration, all these other things. And then it also, of course, produces more food, and so you deal with the food insecurity. So like all of this has to work together, and each piece, if it is not there, it means it's not going to work. And so the partnership aspect of it is the key to everything. And that's why I think, again, these kind of symposium are so important, because we do all need to work together from our different posts to make it work.
Wonderful. So the theme, obviously, of today's conversation is about the need for investment and capital, but investment is often not in the form of capital. It's the people, it's the knowledge, it's the culture and the relationships. I kind of want to maybe turn our attention to what are the other gaps that we see, because different things keep us up at night. The things that scare me as an entrepreneur are probably not the things that keep researchers up at night or what the Fortune 500s are thinking about, but maybe my problems are your solutions, if you will. So what are some of the gaps that you're seeing that you would love to see addressed, where if we had this collective think tank of all these people coming together, we could solve each other's problems? And maybe, Sarah, I'll start with you.
Maybe I'll echo a little bit of, I think, what Brooke was talking about is it's really understanding what each partner and which institution is trying to do, because I think so often sometimes challenges emerge when there's not clear clarity or alignment on goals in some of these partnerships, because different institutions are coming from different perspectives, be they from a, let's say a corporate perspective or a philanthropic perspective or a research perspective. And so really making sure that there is alignment across any of those discussions kind of has to be key, because if not, that's, I think, where we get into the problem of the partnership doesn't kind of provide the results that people were looking for, or there's not enough buy-in on the ground to say that, was this really the solution that will actually fix the problem, or was it something that someone thought up that they thought was really neat and advanced technology, but maybe didn't address the underlying core fundamental issue?
And usually these misalignments, when you see them, are they usually across just different time horizons? Like, are we thinking about things as a 5 or 10 year focus, where companies, because of your stakeholders, have more of an urgency? Is it one of scale, about like we're thinking about things at a research lab level, but you're thinking about things across millions of acres? Like, if you had to kind of define those buckets of disconnect, where would you want to reset those on expectations?
Honestly, I think they can be across all of them, and that's really when it gets to sort of what's that solution that someone is working on together with partners to say, it might be we're looking at a commercial solution in the next, let's say 2 years or 5 years. It may be we're trying to target different end users, and so therefore there are different expectations about what that product may look like. So I think it really just varies based on what the particular area that one's looking at from an innovation perspective, but would welcome thoughts that others might have on that from.
And Brooke, obviously, your demographic of growers, could be different than what we're thinking about as large U.S. row crop farmers. A lot of times, do you see a disconnect between the innovations that are coming out of, the U.S., the rest of the world, for what solutions that you may need on hand, and you're like, gosh, we need more of these types of solutions rather than, what we're kind of seeing for these large, 10,000 acre crops?
I would say yes and no.
Okay.
So farmers everywhere, whether they're a big farmer in the U.S. or a very small farmer, they're enterprising. They're some of the most enterprising people, especially when you don't have much, you become very enterprising. And they're always looking for ways to do things better. And so I will put out there that things are changing in terms of foreign aid in the world.
Yes.
It's happening. Right, the elephant in the room. Things are changing. But I would actually see it a little bit as an opportunity because it's an opportunity to move a little bit away from the Western-dominated, this is the way we think it should work, and maybe it's an opportunity for some of the folks in the developing world to take the reins and say, this is what we think needs to be done. Now, we still need to be investing. They still need the research. A lot of this research is still being done at some of the bigger universities in the US and things, but things are changing, and maybe that is going to be an opportunity for these folks at the last mile to say, no, I don't need that solution. I want to know, I'm not interested in corn. I'm interested in millet. I focus on this for now. So on a certain level, I think it's okay. Like, the world's going to be okay, and maybe things will change in ways that are good for the development of the folks that are out there trying to eke out the living and solve the food security problems in developing nations.
Simone, Phil, for you guys, do you see this change? Because, Phil, you mentioned earlier that the centers of research are changing in terms of who's funding it. And traditionally, there's been gaps like, corn, soybeans, and we have received the bulk of research dollars. It's kind of become this vicious cycle, right, where the crops that receive the dollars become more successful. As a result, those are more profitable, and we continue to put more dollars into them. But with this change, do you feel like the market is reacting fast enough to support the research that you guys are doing? Or is that market still too early and emerging for the research to kind of, be funded, if you will? Because the timelines for agriculture is what scares me every day. We make decisions today that will impact us in 7 or 10 years, and there's no certainty in the markets, or if those markets change overnight and they're capricious, we can't jump on a dime, if you will. So how do you think about this changing demographic and the market changes to how research should be directed?
Right, and I think also reflecting Brooke's comments too about sort of differentiating between different market segments in the world and different economies. If we take a sort of forward-looking view of how agricultural development is going to play out, and a focus, I think, as Carrie mentioned in the first session, needs to be on sub-Saharan Africa. In our new data we put together, that region as a whole invests a paltry 3% of the entire world's agri-food R&D investments. And so, but there is change. I do a lot of work in Africa, and there's a lot of change going on, a lot of market development. And I think whilst the farmer we've been mentioning is sort of a core player, other players in that agri-food value chain are important as well. And as the continent of sub-Saharan Africa develops its agri-food systems, we've got an acceleration of people moving off the farm into urban environments. And so we're lengthening the value chains that what before was subsistence or semi-subsistence production systems over the next 15, 20, 30 years is going to evolve into embryonic and then hopefully maturing agri-food value chains. And so I think knowing that the time it takes to get technology into the hands of farmers and others in the agri-food value chain, we need to think about the institutional innovations that will support the technical innovations that drive agriculture. And so the person whose position I hold at the University of Minnesota, Vern Rattan, was the first economist brave enough to ever go and work for a CGIAR centre in 1962 out at Erie. And he focused a lot in his latter career on this role of institutional innovation. So I think we've touched on it. Sarah mentioned her company working in sort of the startup space, which you are also working in terms of a new entrant in that space in terms of venture capital and so forth, is that didn't exist in the agricultural sector 20 years ago, so that's a player. I think the role of private non-profits, bridging the sort of missing middle between the more basic research by public entities, be they universities or government agencies, and private firms. There's a whole group of those actors starting to emerge in the markets, and I think they can help, I think, pick up Brooke's comment about trying to fine-tune and position technologies into the agri-food value chains, given that what's relevant for Malawi, where I've worked in, is quite different than South Africa, and it's quite different from here. So it's right sizing and positioning the technologies in hand with the institutional changes that need to go along to accelerate that sort of change in those systems.
Yeah, very much resonates with our day-to-day experience working around the world, right? It's about technologies, but it's also about institutions, right? And a sound, a really impactful investment encompasses both, right? It does infuse improved technologies, it builds capacity for research and for research delivery and technology delivery to farmers. But it also includes elements of institutional change. And that's not to say that as outsiders we know how to do it better. It's more, really instigating the desire and then the capacity to develop institutions forward. Policies in almost all countries is highly fragmented, right? You have agricultural policies that are at odds with policies on trade, with policies on environment, or on energy development, etc. Right? So some of these barriers that go beyond funding available are these missing connections at the policy level. We need more coherence there. It goes down also into the market level, right? Market segmentation is done, not in a very coordinated way, and innovations are being introduced, technologies are introduced without a very clear strategy in mind. Which consumers or what kind of enterprises do we need to bring on board? I think we have learned lessons around that can make new investments, even if they're not larger, more impactful. And I think we need to share these kind of experiences with each other in forums like this, but also then again take serious and capture the perspectives of countries in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. From their side, how are their investments aligning to funding received or to investments received from outside, right? Their investments are often not very visible, right? They don't show up in statistics because they may not be financial investments as such. They may be more in-kind investments, right? A lot of our programs, they mobilize staff, they mobilize resources like land and research facilities without really monetizing that in our investment plans. I think once we make that more explicit, it also then creates greater visibility and greater credibility and buy-in from national systems and from national policy in these countries. That's very important in terms of research and investment planning. And I think I'd be very interested to share more experiences, also how that looks like with the private sector, the kind of partnerships you enter into with countries in Africa, Asia, or Latin America.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I'm also just conscious of this little red clock telling me that we have a few minutes left. But I want to build on that last point, maybe for each of the panelists, as the action point of today's panel, which is we represent different parts of the value chain to bring innovation to market, but we're a small subsection of agriculture, obviously. As an action point, maybe in closing, if you had a wish list, you can snap your fingers and get everything you wanted, who else needs to be part of this conversation, and what would you ask them for to make our food system more sustainable, more productive, more nutritious? And maybe we'll just go down the road right now.
It's a great question, Han, and I think the way I would answer it is really about how do we focus on the adoption of a lot of these new technologies and sort of the innovation that is being put out into the market across any area of the sector of where it comes from? Because, for a farmer, you don't want to take the risk of changing practices or adopting new technology without being certain that it's going to have value and provide, whether it's more yield or better price or whatever the other metrics you're looking at. And so how do we, whether it's with government, the private sector, multilateral institutions, research, prove out that adoption so that there's more willingness to take some of these technologies on board? Because I think that's really what's going to take to drive us to meeting the broader global food security challenges through increasing productivity and efficiency. And so anything where, whether it's working together to support, pilot programs or other types of things to show the technologies that are being put into the market, whether it's new seeds, new other inputs, different types of equipment, or other technology solutions, once you see it, then it's a lot more likely that a farmer's going to say, oh, I saw that this increased my neighbor's yield by 20%, so let me take advantage of that to be able to kind of bring all these technologies on board.
Wonderful.
Yeah, maybe to add to that without repeating, and I very much agree what you say. Maybe two things. One, on the research side, right? The linkages with research outside of agriculture. This morning, the panel already inspired me to do that, right? We had very prominent scientists to say what's happening in physics and in chemistry, in data science, that can be applied to food and agriculture. Food and agriculture offers a great arena, right, for application, as well as an arena for original research and new ideas. So I think through universities and other channels, we may need to encourage that and very pragmatically look at students and young people, right, to make them excited again about food and agriculture. It's happening in places like India, where food and agriculture really brought a big part of the national economy. It's less so in other countries. Mm-hmm. And the second one, if I may, and that's more of also my own personal kind of interest, is looking at the more informal innovations, the informal research. There's a lot of knowledge being generated as we sit here in markets around the world, data being exchanged. It's not captured, it's not part of the formal research system, and it's not really being utilized for that reason. We need to come up with ways to capture the knowledge of farmers, of traders, of food processors, even if they are not part of formal programs and policies. I think it's a lot we can learn from that, and those are the stakeholders that will also make the difference.
Okay, I'm definitely going to build on that and say, in the US we have extension services, universities in connection to farmers. Most of the world doesn't have that. So even when we do these proof of concepts, even when we go into a community and we have buy-in from stakeholders and we have all the financing and we see what works and we've got, new seeds or new varieties, there's no extension services in these countries to then scale it up, to spread it out, to get more investment, to build it. And so this is, and even to capture some of the local knowledge and things. There's no extension service. So if I had to pick out one thing that's missing that we could do more of to help solve the food security issue is almost like a global extension service, so that one country in Africa, if Kenya's doing something that works, let's spread that to Tanzania. Sometimes that happens informally, but we need a more formal system.
Proliferation. Phil, take us home.
Two aspects I'd like to focus on. One, on sort of the innovation value chain. One, we've talked a lot about public-private partnerships. I think there's practical solutions, and we're trying to be part of that solution. We've just fortunate to receive some Gates Foundation funding, where we're partnering with the CGIAR partnership unit to build up a thing we've dubbed AFI, the Agri-food Innovation Intelligence Database, to help inform people as to who to partner with respect to innovation co-creation, innovation scaling. And whilst some of that data exists, none of it's actually been brought together in a consistent fashion. And the types of partners that you'd form here in the US or North America are very different than you'd form in sub-Saharan Africa, because there'd be different scale and different size and different market segments. So we're trying to solve that sort of market failure at that end. And then I think picking up at the other end, I see lots of encouraging innovation in terms of the last mile delivery phase, particularly say in sub-Saharan Africa, where there's just access to to quality seeds and certified fertilisers that are unadulterated and things of that nature, and bundling those inputs up with the agronomic advice because of failed or faltering extension services. And again, entities like One Acre Fund, for example, which I think now are servicing 5 million farmers across Malawi and Nigeria and Kenya and so forth, that are bundling advice and inputs together to bring them that last mile to farmers. So I think the investment trends need to be turned around, but there's encouraging signs that there is a lot of innovation going on out there that with a modicum of support can really help flourish.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank all you guys for being on this panel today. And again, the call of action here is, we need more investment than ever, but we need more partnerships as well. We need different voices across the supply chain talking in unison. That's for both, emerging as well as developed economies. And again, the solutions that work here probably work elsewhere, but we have to be sensitive to the cultures, the needs, and to make sure that we're building bespoke solutions around the world if we really want to solve the insecurity issues facing us in 2030 and 2050. So please give our panelists a round of applause.